Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. In Sri Ramana, the path of Sri Ramana, Sadhu, in chapter 6, near the beginning of chapter 6, Sadhu Om talks about the fourfold means, the sādhanā catuṣṭayam, which is given, which are four qualifications that are given in Viveka-chudamani and many other Advaita Sastras. So a friend asked me to talk more about that. What Sadhu Om has given there in the body of the book and also in a footnote. The footnote, he describes the third of the four means, which is sorry, I forgot what it's called. It's samadhi shakha sampatti. That is the six accomplishments. So he describes that in a footnote. That's all he has summarized what Bhagavan has, Bhagavan's translation of verses 16 to 30 of Viveka-chudamani. That's the fifth paragraph. Bhagavan's translation, he didn't translate verse by verse. He did a free prose translation. So in the fifth paragraph of his prose translation, he translated those 16 verses. That's verses 15 to 30, in which these qualifications are enumerated and explained. So today I'll go through what Bhagavan has written in that paragraph. This paragraph is principally about adhikara. Adhikara is a word that in some contexts means authority or prerogative, but in this context, it means the worthiness or fitness for pursuing this path of Atma-vichara. So that is what this paragraph is about. So I'll go through it sentence by sentence. The first sentence corresponds to verse 16. In that, oh yeah, sorry, I said 15 to, it's 16 to 30, which is in all 16 verses, yes. Or 15 verses, sorry, 15 verses it is. So in the first sentence, what Bhagavan says is, Medaviyai sarate grahitu asarate talakudia samatya vanai sastrangalil kuriyula lakshangal yavum tan bal ameya petron Atma-vichara til adhikari avan. What that means is, Medavi means being Medavi. Medavi is one who is extremely intelligent. When I'll explain as I go along, that is, here when it's talking about intelligence, it is very different types of intelligence. In the intelligence that we need for understanding this path of self-investigation, it's not the sort of intelligence that can understand very complex things. It's the type of intelligence that can understand subtle things. So we need a certain clarity of mind in order to understand, because this is though it's a very simple subject, it's a very deep and subtle subject. So we need the type of intelligence that is able to see clearly deep and subtle things. So often people who are very intelligent in other fields may not be able to understand this at all. Whereas those of us who may be of very average intelligence in worldly matters, average or below average, we by the grace of Bhagavan, we may have the type of intelligence that is necessary, the type of clarity that is necessary to understand this. So he begins by saying Medavi, being one who is extremely intelligent. And then the next qualification is being one who has the samatya. Samatya means skill or ability to reject the inessential, grasping just the essential. That is, because this is a very deep and subtle subject, and because the type of intelligence that is required for this subject is what is called viveka. Viveka is that ability to distinguish one thing from another, to distinguish the permanent from the impermanent, the essential from the inessential, the real from the unreal. So it said, being one who has the skill or ability to reject what is inessential, grasping just the essential. So that's the second. Then the next one is one who has achieved to be settled in oneself all the lakshanas. Lakshanas means signs, characteristics, or qualities, but is described in the Sastras is adhikari. Adhikari means one who is worthy or fit in Atma-vichara. It literally means in Atma-vichara. In English, we'd say for Atma-vichara. So in order to be fit to practice this part of Atma-vichara, we need to have a subtle intelligence, a subtle power of discernment, of distinguishing the essential from the inessential, the permanent from the eternal from the ephemeral, the real from the unreal. And so that's the type of intelligence we need. That intelligence will give us the ability or skill to grasp what is essential and to set aside what is inessential. And we also need these, all the lakshanas, all the characteristics or qualities. So the next sentence, Bhagavan says, enne, that means what? That means implies what are these lakshanas? So in the next sentence, he talks about the lakshanas. The next sentence is vivikiyai, viraktanai, samadhamadi, saguna, sahitanai, tivra mumukshuvai ulla, sādhanā yukta, adhikarike, brahma vicharam seya yogyate undahum. That means only for the adhikari, the one who has the requisite fitness. So who is the adhikari? The adhikari is one who possesses these sadhanas. Sadhana means. Here it means in the sense of these qualities, these lakshanas, these characteristics. So what are the characteristics? Which they are being viveki. Viveki means one who has the ability to distinguish, discern, or discriminate. Being virakta. Being virakta means one who is free from desire and attachment. Being one who is endowed with good qualities, sadguna, beginning with calmness, sama, and restraint, dhamma. And being tivara mumukshu. Mumukshu means one who has yearning for liberation. Tivara means intense. So one who has intense yearning for liberation. So only for such a person will the fitness, the yogyata, the fitness to do Brahma Vichara arise. So that is Bhagavan's translation of verse 17. Then in the next sentence, he goes on to enumerate these, what these qualities are. That is, he said it in an indirect way in the previous sentence. He said, being viveki, being virakta, being endowed with these guna, beginning with calmness and restraint, and being tivra mumukshu, then we must be such a person. So he then goes into it in more detail in the next sentence. Sadhanangal, that is the sadhana is mentioned there. Here sadhana means means, but here it means means in the sense of the qualifications, the essential qualities that we must have for this. One is nitya anitya vastu vivekam. That means the ability to distinguish the eternal from the ephemeral. Nitya means what is permanent or eternal, and nitya is what is impermanent or ephemeral. That's number one. Number two is iha mutra pala bhoga viraga. That means freedom from desire for enjoyment of the fruit, either here or hereafter. The fruit here implies, the word pala implies the fruit of actions. So if whatever actions we do under the sway of our will bear fruit. So in order to have a good life in this world and in the next world, here and hereafter, those who follow the path of karma, doing action for the fulfillment of desires, in the Vedic context, they used to do yagas and yajnas. They used to follow the injunctions of the karma kanda, the portion of the Vedas that dealt with ritualistic actions, and they believed that by doing those ritualistic actions, they will get all favorable things in this world, and they'll go to heaven or wherever afterwards and enjoy there. So we need to be free of desires for all such things. We shouldn't be doing actions with the desire to enjoy the fruit of those actions. But the reason is because the fruit of action, as Bhagavan says in verse 2 of Upadesha Vinayin Vilevutru, the fruit of action passing away. That is when we do an action, every action has a certain fruit. When we experience that fruit is then finished. Just like if we eat a mango, we can't eat the same mango twice. Once we've eaten the mango is finished. So likewise with the fruit of karmas. So because the karmas are finite, the fruit of karmas are finite. So it's all, both karma and the fruit of karma are all anitya. They're all impermanent, ephemeral. So if we are still having desire for the ephemeral fruit of actions, we are not qualified for this path. And then number 3 is samadhi shatka sampatti. Sampatti is a word, but it's got a range of meanings. We're saying there's no. We're saying somewhere I noted down what a range of meanings that it has. It means accomplishment, fulfillment, or prosperity. Often in a material sense, it means material prosperity, but here it means the spiritual prosperity. That is the good qualities, which are the real treasure. So what are these 6 qualities is enumerated later. So these 6 qualities, or these 6 accomplishments, as it's expressed here, are, sorry, I'm just getting back to where I was. They begin with sama. Sama means calmness or tranquility. and they'll be enumerated in more detail later. And 4, mumukshutvam, a yearning for liberation. So these 4 are what are said by sages to be the means for the requisite means for practicing Atma-vichara, or Brahma-vichara, as it's also called. And as I say, here means in the sense of the essential qualifications, or the essential qualities we must have, characteristics we must have in order to be fit for this path. One thing that's worth saying here, none of us, well, very few of us will have all these qualities in a very intense form. That's what's called tīvra adhikari. Very few of us are tīvra adhikari. But if we don't have even these qualities, even to some extent, we won't be interested in following this path of this spiritual path, this path of self-investigation. So if we are interested in following this path, that's itself an indication that we already have these qualities, at least to a sufficient extent to get started. This is why Bhagavan, of his own accord, generally didn't talk about qualifications like this. Here he's translating a portion from Atma-vichara. But Bhagavan generally put emphasis, if we have the liking to practice Atma-vichara, that alone is sufficient. The very fact that we have the liking means we already have all these requisite qualifications to at least a sufficient extent to get started. So, and then the next sentence he says, adhikariku ive irandale brahmanishte kidekum andri indrel siddhiadu. That means only if these, meaning these qualities, these above said 4 qualifications, only if these are present for that adhikari. The word present isn't there. If these exist for the adhikari, or these are there for the adhikari, will Brahmanishta be obtained? If not, it will not be accomplished. That is, these qualifications are essential in order to investigate ourselves and be as we actually are. That is, in the first sentence, Bhagavan used the term Atma-vichara. I think that in that context, it's not there in the original verse, but that first sentence was a translation of, it was put Atma-vidya, but which means Bhagavan interprets that Atma-vidya as Atma-vichara. Then in the second sentence, it talks about Brahma-vichara. Since Atman is Brahman, that is, we ourselves are Brahman, investigating ourselves is investigating Brahman. Here he talks about Brahmanishta. Nishta means being as that, literally means standing as Brahman. So that means being firmly established as Brahman. In other words, being as we actually are. So in order to be as we actually are, we need to have these qualifications. And then he goes on to say, ivatral, that means among these. Then he describes each one in more detail. 1, Brahmame satyam jagatu mitye ennum nityame nitya vastu vivekam. That means the nischaya, in Tamil it's nichaya, but it's a word of Sanskrit origin, nischaya. That means the ascertainment, conviction, or certainty It also means investigation. So the implication is it's the conviction or certainty that is reached by careful consideration and investigation. So we need that nischaya, that's a conviction that Brahman alone is real and the world is unreal. Having that is what is called nitya vastu viveka. Nitya vastu viveka, as I said earlier, viveka means the ability to distinguish. And nitya means nitya is eternal, anitya is ephemeral or impermanent. So the ability to distinguish the eternal from the ephemeral, this is absolutely essential if we are to follow this path, because why this is essential, everything, all phenomena are impermanent. All phenomena are things that appear and disappear in our awareness or in our view. But the one thing that remains, whatever appears or disappears in awareness, awareness alone remains. Where in waking and dream, so many phenomena are constantly appearing and disappearing in our awareness. But the awareness remains. Even in sleep, where no phenomena appear and disappear, the awareness remains. So the awareness is what is that fundamental awareness of our own being. That awareness I am is what is permanent. Everything else is impermanent. So only if we understand this clearly will we understand what it is we are to investigate. That is, when many people, when they hear about self-investigation, it's not clear to them what has to be investigated. Even when it's explained by Bhagavan that self-investigation means fixing our attention on ourselves, or fixing the mind on ourselves, as he puts it in Nana. Fixing the mind on ourselves means fixing our attention on ourselves. Many people have difficulty grasping what is this, what is it that we have to fix the mind on? Because it's obviously not an object, but how to fix the mind on the subject. We need to clearly understand that everything that appears and disappears is something other than ourselves. So what we actually are is what is nitya, what is permanent. So we are Bhagavan often used the analogy of the screen in the cinema. The pictures are constantly changing, but the screen remains permanent. Whether pictures are projected or not on it or not, the screen remains there. And the screen is unaffected by whatever pictures are projected on it. As Bhagavan said, if a wild forest fire is projected on the screen isn't burnt. If a big flood is projected on the screen doesn't become wet. So the screen is ever untouched. So the pure awareness, which is the reality of ego, the background of ego, what illumines ego, that is constant and unaffected by anything. What's the awareness that seems to be affected by all these things is ego. But ego itself is anitya. Ego is impermanent. Though ego is not a phenomenon, ego is that in whose view all phenomena appear and disappear. Ego itself appears in waking and dream and disappears in sleep. So it is impermanent, it's ephemeral, it's anitya. So understanding that what we are to investigate is only what is permanent. In other words, that is, ego is a adjunct conflated awareness. It is what is called chit jadagranti. It is a conflation of chit, which is pure awareness, the awareness I am, with adjuncts, which are jada. The adjuncts are this body consisting of 5 sheaths. All these 5 sheaths are jada. And they're all impermanent because they appear in waking and dream, they disappear in sleep. So ego appears in waking and dream because ego is ego only when it's conflated with, when the awareness is seemingly conflated with adjuncts. So, so ego consists of, ego is a mixture of what is, of chit, which is permanent, and jada, the jada upadis, the jada adjuncts, which are impermanent. So when we investigate ourselves, what we are investigating is the permanent element of ego, which is the awareness that remains even in the absence of ego. That is the awareness I am. So that is being able to distinguish these two is what this what is permanent from what is impermanent is what is called nitya vastu viveka. And what is permanent is real, what is impermanent is unreal. So what is permanent is that satchit, that being awareness, I am, that is what is called Brahman. So the certainty that Brahman alone is real and the world, in other words, all impermanent things are unreal, that is what is called nitya vastu viveka, the ability to distinguish the eternal from the ephemeral. Once we've understood the distinction between what is eternal and what is, when we distinguish what is eternal from what is ephemeral, since what is permanent alone is what is real, we need to seek to know and to be what is permanent, and thereby to give up what is impermanent. This is what it was referred to in the first sentence of grasping the essential and rejecting the inessential. The inessential is all the impermanent things. What is essential is only what is permanent, which is ourself. And we ourselves are Brahman. So wherever the word Brahman is used, we should understand it as being ourself. It's not, Brahman is not anything other than ourself. But so long as we take ourselves to be this person, Brahman seems to be something other than ourself. But we need, this is where having this subtle intelligence is required. We need to understand whenever the word Brahman is used, though it seems to be referring to something other than ourselves, it actually refers to nothing other than ourselves. So that is the first qualification, nitya vastu viveka. Then in the next sentence, he talks about what is the second qualification, the iha muha pala boga viraga. What he says in this sentence is dehadi brahma paryantam mulla anitya bogya vastu galin anitya dukkha doshangalai pratyakshamai patalum sastrangalal kepadalum avaigalil undahum vairagyamai iha muttira muttirata pala boga viragam. In the Sanskrit original, it is put as just iha mutra pala boga viragam, but Bhagavan has put it as iha mutra arta pala boga viragam. So I was wondering what this arta means. Then when I checked in some dictionaries, in Sanskrit, though arta is a separate word that means wealth or prosperity, it also means meaning, the meaning of a word. It is also used as I think, a dative case ending. So in effect, it means for the seeking enjoyment, seeking that is the palaboga is the enjoyment of the fruit pertaining to here and hereafter, both here and hereafter. So it doesn't have a separate meaning. Bhagavan incidentally translated Vivekachudamani in very, very early days. It was sometime in the early years of the 20th century. So Bhagavan was just in his 20s at that time. He had never formally studied Sanskrit, but somehow he was able to read Sanskrit texts and understand and explain them beautifully in Tamil. And you can see his understanding, his knowledge of Tamil here from the way, his knowledge of Sanskrit here from the way he uses, by bringing this artha here, that shows only someone who has a good knowledge of Sanskrit will clarify the meaning by adding that case ending there. So the meaning of this sentence is, by seeing directly the defects of impermanence and suffering. That is, the impermanence and suffering are defects. Seeing the defects that are impermanence and suffering of the impermanent objects of enjoyment, the nitya bhoga vastus, beginning with the body and ending with Brahma. What it means by ending with Brahma, that is the highest state that can be achieved in the ultimate fruit of all karmas. The highest fruit that can be attained is to attain the status of Brahma in Brahma Loka. Brahma is the creator. So you can, if you do all the prescribed karmas perfectly, and you probably have to do a huge amount of them, you can eventually, the highest state you can achieve is to become Brahma. In other words, to be the Lord of Brahma Loka, which is said to be the highest of all the heavens. But all of these are a nitya object, that impermanent objects of enjoyment, a nitya bhogya vastugal. So all these, because they're impermanent, they bring suffering. So even if we in this world, we see there throughout history, there have been ambitious men or ambitious women who have sought to become emperors or presidents or achieve positions of great power in this ephemeral world. But in the whole of the whole manifest universe, the highest status you can achieve is to achieve the status of Brahma. That is the emperor of all emperors, so to speak. But even that is impermanent, and it is a state of, it inevitably brings suffering. That is, it's all within the realm of samsara. It's all within the realm of embodied existence. And so inevitably, it's impermanent, and what is impermanent brings suffering. Because however much we enjoy pleasures, since the pleasures are impermanent, once the pleasures pass, we will then suffer. We'll be craving those pleasures to have more and more of those pleasures. So suffering is inevitable. Suffering is the very nature of samsara. So we need to see this directly. In other words, we need to clearly see, understand from our own experience that anything is permanent is going to bring us, however much it may give us enjoyments, pleasures, it's ephemeral, and it's going to bring suffering in its wake. So none of these things are worth seeking. Even having the ambition to become Brahma is a worthless ambition, because it's seeking things, but seeking a status that is impermanent and that is inevitably going to bring suffering in its wake. So by seeing this directly, seeing from our own experience, anything that is impermanent is unsatisfactory, when it's never going to satisfy us. And whatever doesn't satisfy us, it brings a mixture of pleasure and pain, happiness and misery. So by seeing this directly, and also by hearing it from the Shastras, merely hearing it from the Shastras is not sufficient. We need to see it clearly for ourselves. We need to have that nitya vastu viveka. We need to clearly see, distinguish the permanent from the impermanent, and clearly see the inherent defects, the defects of impermanence and suffering that are in all impermanent things. So by seeing this directly and by hearing from sastras, we should get vairagya. So vairagya, the desirelessness that arises towards them, that means towards all those objects of enjoyment, is ihamutra palabhoga viraga, freedom from desire for the enjoyment of the fruit of actions either here or hereafter. And then we come to the third one, which is the samadhi shatka sampatti. So Bhagavan now enumerates each of these six. The first one is sama, which is calmness or tranquility. So what Bhagavan says about that is, Vishayangalil ulla doshangale adikadi nenetu patal avegalil virakti adendu manate tan lakshya til irituvadu samam. We can see from the wording here how all these, that is, as I said, there are four qualifications, and of these four qualifications, the third one is 6 parts. So 6 plus 3, that makes 9 in all. How they're all closely linked. The first one is the viveka. The viveka leads to virakti, the detachment of the freedom from desire. That is also connected here. He brings in the word achieving that virakti. How do we achieve the virakti? That is the detachment from the phenomena, is by repeatedly considering and seeing the defects that are inherent in them, the defects in them. So the meaning of this whole sentence is fixing the mind on its target, having achieved virakti, having achieved detachment. Earlier it was said viraga, but viraga and virakti amount to much the same thing. Having achieved detachment from phenomena, vishayas, by repeatedly considering and seeing the defects in them, is sama, calmness or tranquility. That is, once we've understood the inherent defects in all these impermanent objects of enjoyment, and once when we carefully consider that, that should give us detachment from all these things. So having achieved that detachment, what should we do? We should fix the mind on its target. Here Bhagavan Bhagavan is translating from the Sanskrit. It is simply said here, fixing the mind on its target. So what is its target? It's not expressed explicitly here, but we need to understand from the context, since all impermanent things, since we need to achieve detachment from all permanent things, our target is that which is permanent. That which is permanent is what is called Brahman, which is ourself. So the target, fixing the mind on its target, means fixing the mind on what is permanent. What is permanent is what is called Brahman, which is nothing other than ourself. So fixing the mind on its target, from the perspective of Bhagavan's teachings, we can easily understand that what is meant here by fixing the mind on its target is fixing the mind on ourself. In other words, being self-attentive. That is Atma-vichara. But many people don't understand it like that, because the word lakshya means target. Anything that is meditated upon is called a dhyana lakshya, the target of meditation. So any object we meditate on, if we meditate on a mantra, a name or form of God, or some point, some place in the body, some chakra or something, or whatever we meditate on, that is a dhyana lakshya. So many people, without the required discrimination and intelligence. When they read this, they think, oh, this is recommending meditation. We have to meditate on whatever be our dhyana lakshya. If we've been given mantra japa, if we've been given diksha in the mantra, if we've been given mantra diksha, we should be fixing our mind on the mantra. Or if we are practicing yoga, we fix our mind on some object of meditation, some chakra or some kundalini or this or that. But that is, if we have the intelligence to understand what is being said, if we're able to understand the implication, here fixing the mind on its target means fixing the mind on ourselves. So the first of the, and only by fixing the mind on ourselves can we achieve that enduring calmness or tranquility. So long as we're allowing the mind to go outwards towards other things, the mind will be in a constant state of agitation, because attending to anything other than ourself is an activity of the mind. Attending to ourself is a cessation of the activity of the mind. That is, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we as ego subside. The state in which ego subsides, that alone is true calmness or tranquility. So if we understand these, what is said here in the culture of money, in the light of Bhagavan's teachings, it becomes very clear how deep actually the meaning of all these things is. But if we don't view it in the light of Bhagavan's teachings, it's very easy to interpret these things superficially. Or all that's being recommended here is dharana or dhyana or some one of the steps of one of the 8 limbs of yoga. We are practicing concentration by fixing our mind on some target. That is not what is meant here. It's not just mere. It's not a mere concentration exercise that is talked about here. It's fixing our mind on ourselves. That alone should be our lakshya. We shouldn't have any lakshya other than ourselves, because what do we seek to know? We seek to know, who am I? So what should our dhyana lakshya be? It should only be I, nothing other than I. So if we understand this correctly, this is all in perfect accord with Bhagavan's teaching. But many people who don't understand in the light of Bhagavan's teaching, they give all sorts of other interpretations to it. Which is why it was necessary for Bhagavan to come to, that is, though everything that needs to be said has been said in the Upanishads, in the Brahma Sutra and the Bhagavad Gita. These are called the Prasthanatraya of Vedanta. So everything that needs to be said is already said there. But then why was it necessary for Shankara to come along and write commentary on all these? Because people didn't understand. They weren't able to grasp what the implication of these things is. So Shankara wrote his Prasthanatraya Bhashya, his commentary on all these things, establishing that Advaita is the import of all of Vedanta, the ultimate import of Vedanta. Of course, Vedanta texts have give room to be interpreted in different ways according to people of different levels of spiritual development will understand the same text in different ways. That's why there are so many different interpretations of Vedanta. But what Shankara showed is what is the ultimate import of all these things. So the ultimate import is Advaita, one only without a second. But in spite of all that Shankara wrote, people who have been following Shankara for hundreds of years, more than a millennia, it's more than 1,000 years since Shankara wrote his commentary, they were not understanding what is the practice. So the same Shiva who came in the form of Shankara had to come again in the form of Bhagavan to make very clear what is the actual practice of Advaita. The actual practice of Advaita, if we think of it, there's a simple logical reason for this. Advaita means one only without a second. So any practice that involves more than one cannot be a practice of Advaita. So if our dhyana lakshya is something other than ourself, that is duality. There's a meditator and an object meditated upon. Only if the meditator is what is meditated on. In other words, only if the meditator is meditating on itself is it truly an Advaita abhyasa, a practice of non-duality. That's why we are so fortunate that we have Bhagavan's teachings, because we're able to understand what Shankara had written. We're able to understand the practical implication, the practical import of what Shankara wrote, only in the light of Bhagavan's teachings. And if anyone thinks this is an overstatement, why is it that for so many hundreds of years, for more than 1,000 years, people have been, of course, some people understood what Shankara meant and they practiced it and achieved what the goal, but many failed to understand. And so we have all these practices like Soham Bhavana and all these different things that people practice because they didn't understand the practical import of what Shankara was teaching. So they came to their own conclusions about what is the practice of Advaita. The next sentence is he's describing Dhamma, which means restraint. Vishayangalil sellam jnana karma indriyangale therapy adanadan kora tileye. Bhagavan explained that not kolaka. This is a Sanskrit word I'm not familiar with, but anyway, Bhagavan explains that it means sthana. Sthana means place. Sthana tile, irika sevadu dhammam. So what that means is making the sense organs and the organs of action which flow towards phenomena, vishayas, remain in their respective locations, having made them turn back, is Dhamma. So what does this mean? What do you mean by making them remain in their respective locations? Our attention goes out through the five senses, the sense organs of the sense organs, in order to perceive the world, in order to grasp the world in our awareness. And through the organs of action, we seek to achieve achieve all sorts of objects of desire through our actions. We seek to. So this is all an outward flow towards phenomena, as he says. It is Vishayangalil Sallam, which flow towards phenomena. So these sense organs and organs of action, they're all outwardly directed, going towards phenomena, away from ourselves. So what do you mean by making them remain in their respective locations, not allowing the attention to flow outwards through these sense organs and organs of action? In other words, keeping our mind, as he said in the previous word, fixing the mind on its target. If we fix the mind on its target and understand that the target is ourself, by attending to ourself, we are preventing the attention going outwards and through the sense organs to know anything, or through the organs of action to gain anything. Having made them turn back. So turn back, what does he mean by, in Tamil he says therapy. Therapy means causing to turn. Turn here implies turning back. Turning back towards what? Turning back, when we flow outwards through these sense organs and organs of action, we're flowing away from ourselves. So making them turn back means making them turn back towards ourselves. So if we are fixing the mind on its target, as Bhagavan says, that is, or Shankara says, that is samma, that is calmness or tranquility. It is also restraint, because by fixing our attention on ourselves, we are preventing it from going outwards, flowing towards phenomena. So it's again, what is implied here is self-attentiveness, keeping our attention on ourself. If we understand all these correctly, they're all referring to self-attentiveness. It's all different ways of describing the same practice of self-attentiveness. So that is restraint, Dhamma. The next sentence is, without Manatu Purva Vasanayal Meendum Bahya Vishayangale Ninayadu Tan Lakshyatileye Stiramai Nirati Itara Karmangale Vittu Vittu Uparati. This again is saying the same thing, more or less. Without thinking again of external phenomena, Vishayas, Bahya Vishayas, due to former inclinations, Purva Vasanas, that is, it's under the sway of vasanas, but we allow our attention to go out towards all these vishayas. So if we don't allow the mind to go out without thinking again of both phenomena, firmly fixing the mind only on its target, as we've understood the target referred to here, the lakshya, is ourself. So if we firmly fix on our mind on ourself, we thereby prevent the mind from thinking about all these other things. Firmly fixing the mind on its target, the mind thereby giving up other activities, karmas, is uparati, relinquishment. The previous one said we have to stop the organs of action flowing towards phenomena. We have to turn them back. So by turning our attention back towards ourselves, we thereby give up all these activities. So that is what is called uparati, that is called a relinquishment. We are relinquishing all the actions by by fixing our attention on ourselves. We thereby prevent the mind from thinking of the external phenomena, and also prevent it engaging in activities. So that by fixing the mind on ourselves, that is also uparati. So we've seen fixing the mind on ourselves. That is the first one, sama, calmness or tranquility. It is the second one, dhamma, restraint. It's the third one, uparati, relinquishment. And then we come on to the fourth one, evlo dukkangal varinam tade sayamal avetrika engi aramal deriatal avegale sahital titiksha. Titiksha means forbearance. So what is forbearance? However many miseries or afflictions come, without resisting them, in other words, without trying to prevent or oppose them, and without being perturbed and lamenting over them, enduring them with courage, is titiksha, forbearance. So this again, if we are fixing our attention on ourselves, we will not be perturbed by whatever miseries come. We will not try to resist them. All we'll try to do is to ignore them by fixing our attention on ourselves. That is titiksha. So again, this titiksha, if we understand it correctly, it's nothing but keeping our attention fixed on ourselves. Because if we allow our attention to go outwards, we will be perturbed by whatever miseries come. We will naturally lament over them. We'll try to resist them. And we'll therefore find it difficult to endure them. But if we're holding on to self-attentiveness, that will enable us to endure them by not allowing ourselves to be perturbed by them or lamenting over them, and not trying to resist them. So again, less directly, but nevertheless implied here is self-attentiveness, because it's only by self-attentiveness that we can have true titiksha or forbearance. That is, by holding on to ourselves, we will be unaffected by all the, inevitably we're in samsara, we're in the state embodied, in the state of embodiment. In this state of embodiment, all sorts of sufferings and afflictions inevitably will come. The body will is susceptible to having accidents, it's susceptible to disease, and even if we live a long, healthy life, sooner or later we're going to die. So all these things are in these miseries and afflictions, very inevitable. And there's no use trying to resist them because they all come according to prarabdha. So however much we try to resist them, we can't avoid them. As Bhagavan says in the note that he wrote for his mother, Endrum naduvadadu, envichikanum naduvadu. What is never to happen will not happen in spite of any amount of effort. Nadapadu entadesayinum niladu. What is to happen will not stop in spite of any amount of obstacle. So that's why that is nadpu en tadesayinum niladu. The same there he says tadesayinum, here he says tadesayamal, without resisting, without trying to obstruct them. Because if we understand that what is destined to happen is going to happen, there's no point in trying to resist it because it's going to happen. However much we try to resist it, we can't avoid it. So it's going to happen. We're going to have to experience all these things. So if we understand this, we won't resist these things. We will just hold on to self-attentiveness and thereby forbear all these things without allowing ourselves to be perturbed by them, however many miseries come. So titiksha is one of the benefits of being self-attentive, because we can have a durable forbearance only to the extent to which we hold on to self-attentiveness. And number 5 is shraddha. Shraddha is a word that is often translated as faith. I've translated it here as trust or confidence because I think translating it as faith is a little bit misleading, because the word faith is very much associated, particularly in Christianity. Faith means accepting certain doctrines, certain teachings, and not questioning them. But the shraddha is something more than just. I was brought up as a Christian, and I was once told that I'm not religious because I asked too many questions. I was told by a Christian monk. He didn't think I was suitable for for talking about religious matters because I asked too many questions. Because there's an expectation that you should just accept what you're told to accept unquestioningly, and that is what is called faith. But that's just it's just the mind which agrees to believe certain things. But that's not. They talk about faith as being a leap in the dark, but the shraddha is not a leap in the dark. As it's explained here, shraddha is nischaya. Nischaya means what is a certainty or conviction, but not just a certainty or conviction arrived at by blind faith. It's a certainty or conviction reached by careful consideration and investigation. So truly speaking, shraddha is a clarity of mind. A clarity of mind, but comes from thinking, from deep and careful consideration and self-investigation. That is what gives this nischaya, this strong conviction. So what is said here, the description of, the definition given for shraddha here is Vedanta Shastramum, Guru Vakyamum, Satyam Ena Kollum Nischayam, Brahma Sakshakara Tiku Heduvana Shraddha. What that means is nischaya, the conviction, firm conviction, which is reached by careful consideration and investigation. The nischaya that holds that the Vedanta Sastras, the sacred texts of Vedanta, and the words of Guru are true is Shraddha, is what is meant by Shraddha. So Shraddha is that strong conviction in the truth of the words of the Sastras and the words of the Guru, which is Hedu for Brahma Sakshatkara. Hedu means a cause, a reason, a motive, a means, or a requisite condition. Here it means a requisite condition in this context. That is, and Brahma Sakshatkara means direct experience of Brahman. In other words, knowing ourselves as we actually are. We can know ourselves as we actually are only if we have Shraddha. Shraddha means that clarity, but that inner clarity that gives us the conviction that what the Shastras say and the Guru says is true. Not just merely blindly believing what they say, but considering it carefully and putting into practice what is said. But considering carefully the words of the Vedanta Shastras and the words of Guru is what is called manana. We think about it in order to make sense of it, but the real clarity. I mean, we get clarity to a certain extent. We understand a little bit by Sravana, but we don't Sravana. If we just listen to the words of the Vedanta Shastras or the words of Guru, without thinking deeply about them, they won't make a very deep impression on us. We need to think carefully about them, make sense of them, understand it. Why is it said like that? Why is it true? But what the Guru said, why is it what the Guru says true? Why is it what the Vedanta Shastra says true? We need to understand by relating it to our own experience and reasoning about it and understanding why this is, why what they say is true. Not just because it's said by the Vedanta Shastras, not just because it's said by Guru, but we are expected to think about it. That is why manana is so important. We need to think carefully, make sense of it. So we get more than the clarity we get from Sravana, we get greater clarity from the manana, because then we make it our own, so to speak. We understand it for ourselves. We understand the reasons why it is said, why the Guru says this, why the Vedanta Shastras say this. But even the clarity becomes even deeper when we put into practice what the Vedanta Shastras and Guru is teaching us, namely Atma-vichara. The deeper we go within, the more clarity we get, and that clarity gives us greater conviction, greater certainty, and that certainty and conviction that is born of manana and nididhyasana. In other words, carefully considering what the Vedanta Shastras and the Guru says, and putting it into practice, investigating ourselves, that is what gives the Shraddha, and that is why it is said here, it's a requisite condition for Brahma Sakshatkara. It doesn't mean just blind faith. It implies that we, because this is number 5 of there's number 7 in the list altogether. Number 1 is nitya vastu viveka, discerning, distinguishing what is real from what is. So that we need to understand it for ourselves. We need to understand why what is permanent is only ourself. Everything else is impermanent. Everything comes and goes in our awareness. Even ego comes and goes in our awareness. We are the ultimate ground, that which is the permanent foundation on which all these things appear and disappear. We have a screen, as Bhagavan said, on which all these pictures are projected. So we need to understand this key for ourselves, and most importantly, we need to put it into practice. Then only will our conviction be really strong. So that's number 5. That is Shraddha. Then the number 6 is samadhana. Samadhana means being steadily settled in deep contemplation. Bhagavan makes it clear that it's a synonym for samadhi, because the way he structured this, he used the word samadhi also as a synonym for samadhana. So what he says is, Sava yatnangalalum Sanchala subhavamai ulla chittate parisuddha brahmatilaye stiramai irital samadhana. Samadhanam. Aktandri manam pona padi poha vidutal samadhi andru. So what that means is, by all efforts, firmly fixing the mind, whose nature, svabhava, is to be chanchala, fickle, unsteady, constantly moving, firmly fixing that mind on parisuddha Brahma, the Brahman, the perfectly pure, infinite being, is samadhana. Samadhana, as I say, it means being steadily settled in deep contemplation. So what is it we should be contemplating on? Only on Brahman. And what is Brahman? Ourself. In other words, we need to keep our attention fixed on ourself. Aktandri means except that, or besides that, manam pona padi poha vidutal samadhi andru. Leaving the mind to go as it habitually goes, in other words, letting the mind go out towards phenomena, is not samadhi. So here we can understand that from samadhi is a term that is originated from yoga, but the Vedantic interpretation of samadhi is not anything other than keeping our attention fixed on that pure Brahman, which is ourself. In other words, being self-attentive, that alone is samadhi. This is somewhat reminiscent of something that Bhagavan says in his Bhagavan translated another work of Shankara called Drisya Viveka. And also he translated in prose, like he did with Vivek Chudamani. In his Avatarika, in his introduction to his his translation of Drisya Viveka, Drisya Viveka talks a lot about different types of samadhi, but Bhagavan summarizes it all. There's only one real samadhi. That is what he calls sahaja samadhi, the natural samadhi. And what is that samadhi? What is that practice of sahaja samadhi? He says, Purva samskaratinal at totra tilulla drishtiye niki tannaye bahyanta drishti bedam indri epodum nadam sahaja samadhi parakatal. That means by the practice of sahaja samadhi, which is attending to oneself without always attending to oneself, always attending to oneself without the distinction, the distinction of bahyanta, bahya antara drishti bedam indri, means without the distinction of seeing inside or seeing outside. That is, so long as we're looking outwards, we need to be told to look within. But when we look within, when we look at ourselves, the difference between outside and inside dissolves. There's only, I mean, we go beyond that pair of opposites of inside and outside. We go beyond that. And how do we do it? That is by fixing our attention on ourselves. We are thereby giving up the view or the outward look where we we give up looking at what is impermanent, and we look at what is impermanent under the because of purva samskaras, purva vasanas. So if we give up looking at other things and fix our attention on ourselves, that is the practice of Sahaja Samadhi. So it's similar to what he says here, fixing the mind firmly on the Parisuddha Brahman. So as I said, earlier he twice talked about fixing the mind on its lakshya. Here we should understand that the lakshya that we should be fixing our mind on is nothing but Brahman. And Brahman is nothing other than ourself. So it means fixing our mind on ourself. And when we fix our mind on ourself, we thereby prevent it going outwards. So this is samadhana, this is samadhi. And this is the only practice that is needed. So if we practice self-attentiveness, all these 6 qualities, we are taking care of it. But if we understand these as 6 different things, some people take it like a step-by-step process. First, we have to achieve calmness by fixing our mind on some mantra or something. Then we restrain the mind from going outwards. Then we give up the karmas, as if it's a step-by-step process, but it's not a step-by-step process. All of these are implied. I mean, the very first one talks about fixing the mind on its target. That is the target. The only correct target is ourself. Because if our aim is to know who am I, which is the aim of all of Advaita, because Advaita, according to classical Advaita, the whole problem is ignorance. The root of all problems is ignorance. And ignorance can be dispelled only by knowledge. So what is that ignorance? Bhagavan makes clear ignorance is nothing but ego, the false awareness, I am this body. And since it's a false awareness of ourself, it can be destroyed only by correct awareness of ourself. So the avidya is ego. Knowing and being what we actually are is the vidya. And that can be achieved only by fixing our mind on ourself. So that is the essential import of all of these. And then he goes, then in the next sentence he says, Ivarum kudi samadhi shakka sampatti enapadam. That means all these 6 together are called samadhi shakka sampatti. Samadhi here means sama adi, that is the 6-fold accomplishment, beginning with calmness. So if we understand the sequence, first he talks about the first requirement is nitya vastu viveka. We need to distinguish the eternal from the ephemeral. If we are able to do that and understand what is permanent alone is real, everything else is unreal and will cause misery, we then get that viragam, vairagya. We lose desire to experience these things. Then these 6 all are centered around fixing our attention on ourselves and thereby withdrawing it from everything else. So if we don't have the discrimination, the ability to distinguish the eternal from the ephemeral, we won't be able to cultivate the desirelessness towards all the ephemeral things. And if we don't have that, we won't be able to practice these. But then finally, what is most important is to have love. Merely not having desire for other things is not sufficient. We must have love to know ourselves. So the 4th qualification is mumukshutvam, and that is described here by Bhagavan as anadi ajnanatal vanda ahankaradi dehantaramai ulla bandate swatmanyanatal tolepadakulla iche mumukshutvam. What that means is only the itcha. The itcha means the will or the wish or the desire or inclination to destroy by swatmanyana, by self-knowledge, the bondage beginning with ego and ending with the body that come by beginningless ajnana is mumukshutvam. It's that will to destroy the bondage. That is the root of bondage is ego. And when we rise as ego, we project the body. So the bondage includes both the rising as ego and projecting the body. So that comes due to ajnana, due to lack of awareness of ourselves as we actually are. So how is that ajnana to be destroyed? It can be destroyed only by knowing ourselves as we actually are. That's called swatmanyana, knowing one's own self. So we can destroy this ajnana and the bondage that arises from ajnana only by knowing ourselves as we actually are. And that will, that desire to do so is what is called mumukshutvam. So we won't be able to follow any of these without that mumukshutvam. So then he goes on to say, in the next sentence, Amumukshutvam mandam madhyamai irandalum, vairagyatalum samadamadi galalum, guru anugrahatalum, kramamai valandu, pavamutru kalantaratil palane kodukum. What that means is, even if that mumukshutvam, that yearning for liberation, is manda. Manda means weak, feeble, slight, slack, dull, or sluggish. In other words, even if we got only a very weak yearning for liberation, or if it's madhyam, madhyama means mediocre. So a bit better than the weak, if it's at least if we have a mediocre. But even if it's weak or mediocre, growing gradually by desirelessness, vairagya, by calmness, sama, and restraint, dhamma, and so on. In other words, by all these earlier other qualifications, and by the grace of Guru, reaching the proper time, it will eventually bear fruit. So if our yearning for liberation is very feeble, it will obviously take time. But this is very important here. It said by the grace of Guru. However feeble our yearning for liberation may be, we are supremely fortunate that we have come to Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the supreme Guru, and however unqualified we may be, by his grace, if we follow his path, if we cultivate vairagya, if we cultivate these qualities of calmness, restraint, and so on, which are all summarized as being which, as I explained, all amount ultimately just to being self-attentive. So by the vairagya and the vichara, it implies, and by the grace, which is possible only by the grace of Guru, in due course, these will grow. That is this, the mumukshutvam will grow gradually by this practice of vichara and by the grace of Guru, and in proper time it will eventually bear fruit. So this is a great consolation for us, because we may think going through all these, I'm lacking all these qualities, or even if I have these qualities, it's very, very feeble in me. Even if it's feeble, or even if it's only mediocre, by the grace of Guru, we will certainly succeed. So even if we consider ourselves to be a hopeless case, we should understand there is hope. Once one devotee asked Bhagavan, is there no hope for me? And Bhagavan sat up and became very alert and said, yes, there is hope. So because we have come to Bhagavan, there's hope for all of us. but we should try our best to cultivate vairagya and all these other qualities, which can all be most effectively cultivated by the practice of Atma-vichara. So how to become qualified to practice Atma-vichara? By practicing Atma-vichara. It's what it all amounts to. Then in the next sentence, he says, vairagya todam kudina mumukshutvam evanidatil tīvramai irukindradau avanidatil kudia samadhamma adi samipatilie palane taram. That means in whomever mumukshutvam, yearning for liberation, combined with vairagya, desirelessness, exists intensely as tīvra. Tīvra means very intense. Only in the proximity of sama and dhamma and so on, in other words, those 6 qualities, which coalesce in him. That is, if we've got that intense mumukshutvam and vairagya, automatically all these other sama, dhamma, and so on will all coalesce in us. And only in such a person will this mumukshutvam give fruit. In other words, we will attain mukti only when the mumukshutvam is very intense. And mumukshutvam and vairagya are very intense. Because when they're intense, automatically we will, these other qualities of sama, dhamma, and so on will coalesce in us. And only in the proximity of those will it give fruit. And those 6, as I say, the essence of all of them is fixing the mind on its target, on Brahman. In other words, fixing the mind on ourself. And then in the last sentence, he says, Anal evanidatil mandamai irikindradau avanidatil samadhamadi marubhumil jalampol abasamahave porundum. What that means, but in whomever it exists feebly, it here implies the mumukshutvam, feebly means as manda, as weakly. If in whomever it exists feebly, in him calmness, sama, restraint, dhamma, and so on, will occur as abhasa, like water in a desert. Abhasa means a semblance or a false appearance. So if our mumukshutvam is not strong enough, all the other qualities, the sama, dhamma, and so on, will be a mere appearance, like water in a desert. So having that strong desire for liberation is very necessary. And even if our desire for liberation is very weak, by the grace of Guru and by practicing what the Guru has taught us, in due course we will gain it. That, as he said in a couple of sentences earlier to that. So that is the Bhagavan's translation of verses 15 to 30 of Vivekachudamani. That's the 5th paragraph in his translation. Just as it's all summed up beautifully by Shankara in verse 31, which Bhagavan translated as a separate paragraph, just 2 sentences. So that's the 6th paragraph. I'll just, though it's not directly relevant, I mean, it's not touching upon these fourfold means of this samadhi, sorry, this sādhanā catuṣṭayam. It is, this is in a way a summary of all of this. That is, what is said here is, moksham adedaraku heiduvai ulla samakriya, samakri, the Bhagavan explains what that means, because that's not such a common Sanskrit word. He puts in brackets sadhanangal. So samakri or Samakri means sadhana, means which are hedu. Oh, wait a second, I'll read the whole thing. Sorry, I was reading the Tamil. Mokshama a day the ku hedu vayulla samakri sadhanangalil bhaktiye mikavum shreshtam. That means among all the means which are a hedu, that means a cause, a means, or a requisite condition for attaining moksha, bhakti indeed is very much the best. It's the foremost. And what is bhakti? He said in the next sentence, Sva Swarupatin, Bhagavan explains Sva means Atma. So Sva Atma Swarupatin, Anusantaname, Bhakti Endru, Mahatma Gal, Solukindrana. That means Anusantana means investigation. It means the same as vichara. So investigation of one's own Atma Swarupa, one's own real nature, is indeed bhakti, say Mahatmas. So Bhagavan often used to say bhakti is the mother of jnana. That is, without that love, we will not be inclined to follow this path. And without following this path, we obviously cannot attain jnana. So the driving force in following this path is bhakti. And the most perfect expression of bhakti is to investigate what we actually are. Swaswarupam means ourself as we actually are, what we actually are. Investigating that, we investigate it by attending to ourselves. So, in other words, keeping our attention fixed on ourselves, that is the ultimate bhakti, say Mahatmas. It doesn't say ultimate bhakti, but Bhagavan has very clearly said in Upadesha Undiyar, in verse 8, he says, rather than anyabhava, meditating on God as if he's something other than oneself, ananyabhava, ananyabhava means meditating on what is not other than oneself, with the understanding that he is I. So if we understand that God is what is shining in our heart as I, what should we meditate on? What should be our dhyana lakshya? It should be nothing other than ourself. So fixing that meditating on nothing other than ourselves, that is anatina uttamam. That is the best among all the practices of bhakti, is the implication, and the best among all the forms of meditation. Then in the next sentence, in the next verse, verse 9, he says, Bhava Balatina, by the strength of meditation. That implies by the strength of that ananya bhava, in other words, by the strength of self-attentiveness, bhavanatita satbhava tu iritale, being in satbhava, being in the state of being which transcends bhavana, which transcends all mental activity. Meditation before mental activity, that means attending to anything other than ourselves is a mental activity. But by the strength of this self-attentiveness, being in that when we attend to ourselves, we subside and we remain in the state of being. So being in that state of being, which transcends all other practices, all other forms of meditation which involve mental activity, that is parabhakti tattva. That is the very nature of supreme devotion. So the same is implied here. I'm sorry, I've talked for a long time, but I just want to wrap this up, because the context in which I was asked to talk about this was in connection with what Sadhu Om has written about it in the Path of Sri Ramana in chapter 6. There he's just summarized what Bhagavan has said in this 5th paragraph. And he's using almost exactly the same words. It's a summary and a very slight paraphrase of what Bhagavan has said. But what Sadhu Om has to say about this is very important, because I have explained this in the light of Bhagavan's teachings. So, for example, I explained that fixing the mind on its target means fixing the mind on ourselves, but not everyone understands it in that way. So, as this is usually understood, people don't grasp the fact that all we need to do is to attend to ourselves. Even when it is said, fix the mind on Brahman, they think about Brahman as something. But unless we understand that Brahman, Tattvamasi, you are that. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. There's no Brahman other than ourselves. So when it is said, fix our mind on Brahman, it means fix our mind on ourselves. But if we don't understand that, though all these things are necessary, they're not adequate unless we understand that what we have to fix our mind on is ourself alone. So what Sadhu Om says about this is, by discriminating the eternal from the ephemeral, an aspirant realizes that liberation is the only permanent thing. Yearning for it, he acquires desirelessness towards other enjoyments and puts forth his effort in the practice of the 6 virtues. The 6 virtues means that's sama, dhamma, etc. Therefore, in the 3rd sadhana, the 6 virtues, the scriptures give him all the aids they can to attain self-knowledge. Thus, when the aspirant puts forth his effort in this 3rd sadhana, is it not clear that he has already completed the 1st, 2nd, and 4th sadhanas? I mean, we won't make effort in this 3rd sadhana unless we have at least a certain degree of viveka, vairagya, and yearning for liberation, mumukshutva. And then he goes on, controlling the sense organs and the organs of action through desirelessness, vairagya, and trying to fix the wavering mind on Brahman are the 2 essential elements among the 6 items in the 3rd sadhana. But while practicing, what exactly does an earnest aspirant do? His primary practice can only be to resist desires for sense objects and think about a 2nd or 3rd person thing he believes to be Brahman, the ultimate reality. That is, so long as we take ourselves to be the body, Brahman seems to be something other than ourselves. So unless we clearly understand the practical import of the Mahavakyas, that the Mahavakyas in effect are saying there is no Brahman other than you. You alone are Brahman. So when they said we should fix our mind on Brahman, we should fix our mind on ourselves. But if we don't understand that that is the practical implication, we'll try to think about Brahman as if it's something other than ourselves. That is the word, once the Mahavakyas actually make the word Brahman redundant. Because so long as we take ourselves to be the body, we are told there's something much greater than this little person we take ourselves to be. That thing is called Brahman. That is the infinite. It is Satyam Jnanam Anantam. It is what is real. It is Jnanam, it's awareness, and it is infinite. But still, because we take ourselves to be finite, that seems to us to be something other than ourselves. So unless we clearly understand the practical implication of the Mahavakyas, that the Mahavakyas are turning our attention back to ourselves, we will continue to think of Brahman as if it's something other than ourselves. Even though we know, we're told it's ourself, but it's not this little me. So it must be something other than this little me. It must be some big me. So we think of inevitably we think of it as something different, unless we understand that the implication of the Mahavakyas is that there's no such thing as Brahman other than ourself. So once we understand that, the word Brahman becomes redundant. It becomes superfluous, because what is the natural name? We don't go around referring to ourselves as Brahman. We go around referring to ourselves as I. So what we need to investigate is only I. If we understand that, all that is said here will be clear. But if we don't understand that, if we don't understand the practical import of Vedanta, we'll misinterpret it, which has been what has been happening for hundreds of years. For this, the only aids available to him from the scriptures are the Mahavakyas, such as I am Brahman, I am he, Aham Brahmasmi, I am he, Soham, Tattvamasi, that you are. However, when he thus practices meditation upon the Mahavakyas, it's a mere flow of thought. This I is that Brahman, towards a second or third person. That is, if we understand that Brahman is I, we need not go on thinking, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. We need to think only about I, because Brahman is nothing but I. Brahman is nothing but I. What we should attend to is I. We should forget this word Brahman, and attend only to what the word I refers to, namely ourselves. However, when he thus practices meditation, bhavana, upon the Mahavakyas, it's a mere flow of thought, this I is that Brahman, towards the second or third person. This thought is only a mental activity, manovritti. In the meditations, I am Brahman, or I am that, what he feels as I is nothing but the mind, which he assumes to be himself. The I that meditates is the first thought, which has risen after sleep and after sleep has come to an end. And the Brahman on which he meditates is a third person object, which comes into existence after his rising as I. That is, we all know I. The first thing we know is I. Even before we know the word I, we know I. That we're aware of ourselves. Brahman is something we learn about later. So unless we understand that there's no Brahman other than I, we'll inevitably think about Brahman as something other than ourselves. The I that meditates is the first thought, which has risen after sleep has come to an end, and the Brahman on which he meditates is a third-person object, which comes into existence after his rising as I. As long as ego, the false awareness I in this body, lasts, one can only take the word Brahman to denote either the second or third person, or not the first person awareness. In the saying I am Brahman, since I represents the first person, the word Brahman can only mean a second or third person. When closely scrutinized, we discover that meditations such as I am he or I am Brahman are nothing but an activity of the mind diverging towards the second or third person. There is therefore a vast difference between these meditations, which are mere mental activities, and the self-investigation taught by Bhagavan Ramana, which is stillness of mind. Let us see how. And then he goes on to say this. In this connection, it's very important to bear in mind what Bhagavan says in Ulladu Napadu. In Ulladu Napadu, there are a number of verses in which Bhagavan talks about this Mahavakya and meditating on the Mahavakya. In verse 32, he says, for example, I won't read the Tamil because I've taken up a lot of time. When the Vedas proclaim that is you, instead of oneself knowing oneself as what, thinking I am that, not this, is due to non-existence of strength, because that alone is always seated as oneself. What this implies is, when the Vedas tell us, Tattvamasi, you are that, or that is you, what should our response be? Oh, if I am that, then what am I? That is, if that refers to Brahman. So if Brahman is I, what do we need to investigate and know? We need to investigate and know I. So instead of being knowing oneself, when he said being knowing oneself, that is, being is that is uh, um, uh, uh, that's yeah. Instead of that is when knowing ourselves is being ourselves is knowing ourselves. So by investigating and knowing ourselves, we thereby subside and are being ourselves. That is the true import of this Mahavakya. So instead of that, if we think I am that, not this, if we go on thinking I am that Brahman, I'm not this body, I'm not this mind, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm Brahman. That is due to, he says, Uraninmayinal. It's due to non-existence of strength. And what strength is he talking about? The strength of discrimination. When it is said that you are Brahman, if we have a strength of discrimination, have if we have that, what is referred to at the beginning of that paragraph as if we are Medavii, that is, if we have that extreme intelligence, we will understand that if Brahman is I, then all I need to do is to investigate I. By knowing I know Brahman. So, but instead of that, thinking I am that, not this, is because of non-existence of strength. We don't have the strength of understanding, the strength of intellect to understand it. So we go on thinking I am that, not this. We are told we are not this body and everything in order to make us think and understand that what we are is not any object. What we are is just the awareness. That awareness is Brahman. That is what we need to meditate upon. That is not something other than ourselves. That is what we actually are. Because that alone is always seated as oneself. So the correct understanding of the Mahavakya, that we understand the practical implication of the Mahavakya, we will investigate only I. But because Shankara was writing for people who were not, that a lot of Shankara's writings were aimed at people who were not drawn to this path. So he had to convince them. So when he goes into great detail analyzing what is meant by that, what is meant by tat, what is meant by tvam, and what is meant by asi. How is that tvam? But all that is necessary only for those who aren't able to understand the direct import of this. But Brahman is what we actually are. So to know Brahman, all we need to do is to investigate and know ourselves. So that's the practical import. So that's what Bhagavan's emphasizing here. In verse 36, he likewise says, if we think that we are a body, thinking no, we are that, will be a good aid for us to stand as that, in other words, to be as that. Since we always stand as that, that is, we always nothing other than Brahman, why should we be thinking we are that? Does one think I am a man? That is, when we wake up in the morning, do we think, I am a human being, I am a human being, I'm not a donkey, I'm not a monkey, I'm a human being? No, we don't, because we know this idea that I am a human being is so deeply ingrained in us, we don't need to think that. So we need to clearly understand that we are nothing other than Brahman. So to know Brahman, all we need to do is to know ourselves. If we don't understand that clearly, then thinking, if we still think that we're a body, then thinking, no, we are not this body, we are that, will be a good aid. But that's very preliminary. That's for those who lack that, what Shankara refers to as, who are not Medavi, who are not possessing that sharp intelligence to understand what this is all about. And then in verse 29, he describes what is the vichara. He says, not saying I by mouth, investigating by an inward sinking mind, where one rises as I, alone is the path of knowledge. He said jnana neri in Tamil. Jnana means knowledge, and neri means the path. So the jnana marga. In other words, the path of Atma-vichara is only investigating with an inward sinking mind where one rises as I. Instead, thinking not this, I am that, is an aid, but is it vichara? When he says adu vichara mama, is it vichara? That means it's a rhetorical question. It implies no. Thinking I am not this, I am that is maybe an aid, but it is not vichara. So, what is the true import of this Mahavakya? I am that. And he expresses that beautifully in verse 27. This is the most beautiful verse of all. Well, they're all very beautiful, but this is for the practice of Atma-vichara. This verse is so beautiful. He says, Nanu diada ullanile, namaduvai ullanile. That means the state in which I is without rising is the state in which we are that. We are as that. That is, what does he mean by saying that? Is it only when we don't rise as I, but we are that? No, we're always that. But what he means here is, in order to experience ourselves as that, in order to experience ourselves as we actually are, we need to be without rising as I, without rising as ego. So that state in which I is without rising, in other words, the state in which we remain as the being I without seeming to become the rising I, which is ego. So being as we actually are, that is the state that is indicated by the Mahavakya, you are that, or we are that. So how to attain that state in which I does not rise? He said he clearly indicates in the next sentence, which is a rhetorical question, but we can clearly understand the implication of it. In the next sentence, he says, Nan udikum tanam adei nadamal, nanudia tanirape savadu evan. That literally means, without investigating the place where I rises, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. When he said the annihilation of oneself, that's that state of manonasa. So when he talks about the state in which I is without rising, he's talking about not just a temporary state. In sleep, I is without rising, but that's only manolaya. Our aim is not manolaya, our aim is manonasa, the state in which I never rises again. So he makes that clear here by saying how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. When he says, without investigating the place where I rises, the place where I rises, the I that rises is ego. The place from which it rises is the being I. In other words, our own being. The I that exists throughout all three states is the being I. From that being I, this rising I rises. So the place where the I rises is nothing but our own being. So when he says, without investigating that, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise, it clearly implies the only way to achieve that annihilation of ourself is by investigating our own being, the place from which, the source from which we have risen as ego. And then he says in the next sentence, without reaching, implying without reaching that annihilation of oneself, how to stand in the state of oneself in which oneself is that. In other words, the implication is, it's fine to say, I am that, I am Brahman, but we don't experience ourselves as that. I now experience myself as I am this body. So if I go around saying I am Brahman, it's a lie, because the I that is saying I am Brahman is the I that now experiences itself as a body. What I actually am is Brahman, But merely saying that, either to myself or others, is of no use. I need to experience it. And in order to experience it, I need to be without rising. That's what Bhagavan said. So without reaching that annihilation of oneself, how to stand in the state of oneself in which oneself is that? So how to experience ourself as Brahman without achieving the annihilation of oneself? And how to achieve that annihilation of ourself except by investigating ourself, our own being, the place from which we've risen as ego. So what is coming back to this this portion of Vivekachudamani Bhagavan translated, if we understand in the light of Bhagavan's teachings, it's very clear what is meant there. But meditating on Brahman means meditating on ourself. And the lakshya we should be fixing the mind on the target is only ourself. We seek to know ourself. I mean, he clearly says in the when describing what is mumukshutvam, he says, it is the will to destroy by swatmanyana, by knowledge of ourself. How can we get knowledge of ourself if we fix our mind on anything other than ourself? In order to gain knowledge of ourself, we need to fix our mind on ourself. So if we read this with keen intelligence, with keen discrimination, and understand the implication of this, what Shankara is saying here is exactly Bhagavan's teachings. We need to fix our mind on ourselves. And in order to fix our mind on ourselves, we need to have great love to do so. But if we don't understand that, if we don't understand the practical implication of these Mahavakyas, we'll go on thinking, I'm not this body, I'm that Brahman, this body is impermanent, Brahman is permanent, so therefore I am Brahman. But by thinking that, that's all a mental activity. In order to be that, in order to be as Brahman, Brahman isn't thinking all day long, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. Brahman is just being as it is. So we need to be as we are. This is what Bhagavan says in the first Mangalam verse of Ulladu Narpadu. I'll just read that because that's also a very important verse in this context. Here in this verse, he doesn't explicitly refer to Brahman. He doesn't mention Brahman by name, but he's referring what he calls Ulladu, what is, and Ullaporul. The Ullaporul means, in the Sanskrit equivalent to Ullaporul is Satvastu, the existing reality, the existing substance, that is Brahman. So what he says here is, if what is were not, would being awareness exist? So that is, there is an awareness that is aware of being. And we couldn't be aware of being if we were not that, if we were not. And as he says in verse 23 of Upadeshundya, since there's no awareness other than what is, to know what is awareness. So that's the implication of this first sentence. And then in the next sentence he says, since the being substance is in the heart without thought, how to think of the being substance, which is called heart? When he says it's in the heart without thought, that is, thought occurs on the surface of the mind, but deep within us, there's just pure being, no thought, no activity. So since that the reality is what is existing in the heart, untouched by thought, how to think of that existing substance, which is called the heart? Then he answers this question by saying, Ullate, ullapadi, ullade, ullal. That means being in the heart as it is thinking. It literally means is thinking, but what it means is meditating on Brahman. In order to meditate on Brahman, we can't meditate on Brahman as if it's something other than ourselves. We can meditate on Brahman only by being as it is. In other words, by being without rising as I. So the state of being in the heart as it is what he refers to in verse 27 as nanu dhyāda ulanilai, the state of in which I is without rising, the state of just being without rising as ego. So sorry, I've talked for 2 hours. Do you want to, is there time for questions, or should we keep the questions for next time?
I think if anyone has any question on the topic that we discussed today, I think we can ask them. If not, I think we can have all the other questions later session. So anyone has any questions on this one?
I hope this was useful, what I said.
Yes, this was very useful, Michael. Yeah, it has like a summary of everything and directing us to the practice finally. I don't see any questions. I have a kind of a question on this topic, so I'll ask that. So how I see this is like all these qualities, I feel as if it is in 2 levels. One is the lower level and another one is the higher level. Please correct me if I'm thinking about it in the wrong way. So our ultimate goal is to keep our attention on ourselves throughout all the time, throughout the day and night. But for most of us, we are not able to be in that state now. So we are trying to practice sometime, and we are interacting with the world sometimes. So when we are interacting with the world, these qualities, for example, the first quality, viveka. So when we are interacting with the world, for example, if I have some time today, if I think about gathering some wealth or power or possession or whatever, like which is not real, which is impermanent, then I have to think about this quality. Okay, viveka. So okay, these are impermanent things which will go away anyway. What is permanent is what is Brahman, and I have to get back to my practice. So it is turning me towards the practice in one way. While doing the practice, the same quality viveka helps me understand what is real versus what is unreal. Whatever appears and disappears, any phenomena is unreal. I myself is the reality, so I have to put my attention on myself. Same way, any quality like titiksha, forbearance, right? Like when something bad happens in life, if we try and resist it, if we try and resolve it, we will put our attention outwards. Instead, we have to accept it, saying it is part of prarabdha, and then coming back to the practice. So I see this 2 level. The lower level is when we are not investigating, these qualities help us to motivate or turn our attention towards ourselves. And the higher level is when we do the practice, it helps us to clarify what exactly we have to do.
Yes, that absolutely. Because particularly this nitya vastu viveka, many people, even though Bhagavan explains that self-investigation means attending to ourself, many people say, but what is this self I have to attend to? So, because we are so used to thinking of ourselves in terms of being this person that we seem to be, this body and mind, and obviously what we actually are is not an object. But then how to meditate on something that is not an object? But if our mind is very outward going, it's difficult to grasp this. But this is a very essential clue. If we think carefully about our experience, everything in our experience, including the I that appears in waking and dream and disappears in sleep, in other words, ego, all these are impermanent. But the one thing that is permanent is our own being. That being awareness, Satchit, in other words, a fundamental awareness I am, that is the one thing that shines throughout all 3 states. So that alone is what is nitya, what is permanent. So if we think carefully about this and understand it clearly, then we will understand that what we have to attend to is nothing other than ourselves. Otherwise, people go on thinking, I have to repeat who am I have to repeat I am. Yeah, that will help. Bhagavan sometimes said, if you go on thinking I, it will lead to that place. that can be an aid to turn our attention back to ourselves. But actually attending to ourselves, that is what is Atma-vichara. That's why he says in verse 29 of Ulladu that I read earlier, without even uttering that word I by mouth, that implies also not even uttering it mentally, just fixing our attention on that which the word I refers to, and thereby sinking within. That is the path of the jnana neri, the path of jnana.
Thank you, Michael.
So these, if we understand these correctly, these are, as you say, we can apply it outwardly whenever our mind goes outwards. It's a way of bringing our mind back. But it also helps in the actual application of the Atma-vichara. We need to clearly understand anything that appears and disappears is something other than us, and we should not attend to that. Like the Atma-vichara, Bhagavan sometimes said it's all a matter of attention. Because we allow our attention to go towards other things, we are in this mess. All we need to do is to turn our attention back to ourselves.
Thank you, Michael.
So I have a comment. Yeah. I have a comment on this. Can I?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So, this verse 16 of Upadesha Undiyar is a practical application of what you're saying.
Absolutely. That is giving up the external Vishayas. I mean, that verse 16 is virtually a summary of the whole of this. Giving up the external Vishayas, the mind investigating and knowing its own form of light, that alone is true awareness or real knowledge.
So this anitya is the all phenomena, and what is nitya is what we are. So we have to turn from all phenomena, which is anitya, to nitya. What we are.
What is a nitya is all phenomena, and that which rises to know those phenomena, namely ego. What is nitya is the heart of ego, the essence of ego, which is the pure awareness I am. That's why we need to reject the inessential and grasp the essential. The essential is only I am. I am Sanjay. In I am Sanjay, Sanjay is inessential. I am is essential. So that is what we need to grasp.
Definitely. I was thinking that verse 16 is the best example of the entire talk you gave today.
Yes, exactly. Bhagavan is a master at summarizing. Truly speaking, the essence of all of Vedanta is Advaita. And the essence of all Advaita is Bhagavan's teachings. The cream of Advaita is Bhagavan's teaching, because Advaita is useless if it's not a practical philosophy. So what is the practice of Advaita? Bhagavan always puts emphasis on the practice. Yes, we need to understand the philosophy, because without understanding the philosophy, we won't be able to understand the practice. But the philosophy is there to serve the practice. That is understanding.
Can you take one question, Michael?
Yes, certainly.
It's regarding the same thing what we're discussing now, so I thought we can just ask this question. So this is from Janaki Raman, sorry. The question is, in the practice, I see that the keeping the attention on I is challenging. Sometimes there is no I. How can one know that the practice is going fine?
There is never no I. Who is it who says there's no I? The I, that is, it's I say there's no I. So I is the one thing that is permanent. What is permanent is the I as being, not the I as rising. The I as rising is ego. That is the same being I mixed and conflated with adjuncts as I am Janaki Raman, I am Thiru, I am Michael, I am Sanjay, I am whoever. when that I gets mixed and conflated with adjuncts, that is called ego. But in that ego, the essence of ego is the pure I. That is what is permanent. That is what we need to hold on to. So anything that appears or disappears is something other than I. It's impermanent. If it appears and disappears, it's not permanent. So what is the one thing that is permanent? In our experience, what is the one thing that we experience throughout waking, throughout dream, and throughout sleep? It's our own being, I am. So that is what we need to hold on to. Some people have all sorts of ideas about the practice of self-investigation. A very common misconception is that all we have to do is to stop thinking. If we stop thinking, that is self-investigation. No, it is not. We stop thinking every night when we fall asleep. Stopping thinking is the aim of yoga. It is not the aim of Bhagavan's teachings. It's a byproduct of Atma-vichara, but it's not the aim of Atma-vichara. The aim of Atma-vichara is to know who am I. Some people say, oh, you have to put your attention nowhere. It's not putting the attention nowhere. It's putting attention on the only thing that actually exists, the only thing that is permanent, namely our own being. So that's why this paragraph begins with the word Medaviyai. Medavi is one who has extreme intelligence. As I say, it's not intelligence to understand very complicated things. The intelligence that is required to understand something very deep and subtle, which is the distinction between ourself as being and all other things, the distinction between our being and our rising. It's only in the view of that which rises that all these other phenomena exist. But that which rises also subsides. It rises in waking and dream, it subsides in sleep. But we remain.
Yeah, I think Radhi has some comment. Please go ahead, Radhi.
Yes, I found, Michael's talk was extraordinarily useful and wonderful. Now, there's one thing I just want, one clarification I loved here was that one way to overcome Vishaya Vasanas, which is always the biggest problem for all of us, is to focus on their doshas, to keep focusing on their doshas. That I found very valuable. And one more thing about
recognizing the doshas is useful, because then we understand when we have the doshas of it, it's impermanent and it causes suffering. But once we understood that, we then need to focus only on ourselves. So a certain understanding is necessary at first, but we shouldn't continue dwelling on that. This is what happens in classical Advaita. They go on.
But anyway, I agree with doshas and with classical Vedanta, which can lead to a lot of circumambulation, a lot of going around.
I was saying about
around the bush. I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. But what I was going to say is that is in classical Advaita, they have what are called prakriyas. Prakriyas of ways of reasoning why the body is not I. So there's analyzing the three states, Drik Drisya Viveka, distinguishing the seer from the seen, all these things. These are all preliminary. We need to understand these clearly, but we shouldn't continue dwelling on these prakriyas, because this is what Bhagavan is referring to in Ulladu when he says, thinking I'm not this, I'm that. We of course we need to understand that I am not this, I am that. But once we've understood that, we have to investigate I. So the practice is not, the prakriyas are preliminary. They're very necessary. We need to clearly understand why we are not this body or mind or any of these things. So it's necessary to have that understanding, but that understanding is for what? For applying in practice. If we've clearly understood that we are not this body, but we are Brahman, then what should we fix our mind on? We shouldn't fix our mind on the body. We shouldn't even fix our mind on Brahman. We should fix our mind on I. Because until we know what we actually are, Brahman is just an idea for us. So when it is said, fix the mind on Brahman, it means fix the mind on yourself.
Yes.
But otherwise, if we try to fix our mind on Brahman, we're fixing our mind on an idea.
Mm-hmm. I also like very much when he says tivra mumukshatvam. I love the word tivra. Tivra means speed. It also means tejasvi. Tejasvi is also speed as well as speed. Speed. I would say just speed. Instant, direct.
Direct. The intensity.
Intense. Yes, intense. I love that word. I love that word, tivra.
Probably none of us are tivra mumukshus. We are just we are manda or best
manda buddhi. Manda buddhi. Yes, manda buddhi, where we go slowly. Manda mood, like you say, mood manda. Mood manda. We're all mood manda, like Shankara says. Manda muda or muda manda, whichever he says. But whatever it is, that tivra, quick liberation is what we can have this instant. Actually, this very instant.
It's available within. It's available here and now, but we need we need to have intense love for that.
Yes, intense love. Yes.
If we lack that intense love, then we have to, the practice is necessary. And by the grace of Guru, as it's assured there, by the grace of Guru, eventually we will achieve it. But the grace of Guru is always available. Yes. We need to, that grace is what has drawn us to this path, what has given us this liking to know who am I. But we need to make use of that by applying it in practice.
Yes. Thank you, Michael. I don't want to take up any more of your time. It's been a long, wonderful, as I said, absolutely extraordinary session of, on exposition of Bhagwan's, insight into Viveka Chudamani for all of us. So thank you very much. And Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.
Namo Ramanaya.
Thank you, Michael. Namo Ramanaya. Can we conclude this session, Michael?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Namo Ramanaya.
Namo Ramanaya.